Okay, let's just start rolling. This is actually not a super long presentation, so you may get back some minutes. This is, I want to focus a little bit on Q&A at the end because I'd rather take more questions about whatever you guys are doing. That's one of my biggest issues with a lot of these is we just blow over time so bad and nobody ever asks a question. We will be down at the DevCentral booth, all of us, to continue these conversations. About anything. It doesn't even have to be about computers. Whatever. So this is theoretical big IP. This is a DevCentral Basics, which is kind of pre-101, but I will go wherever you want. And it's based off a lot of questions we get, not from the network administrators, not from the security operators, but we get the sales engineers will call us saying, hey, can you provide content for this poor application developer that just inherited networking, and they don't know networking. So we suddenly realize there's a big void, but that's also the questions that we're getting. So we need to talk about some of these common issues. We see a lot of very strange deployments. And I think that sums up what we run into with the cloud or with new people coming into having to own infrastructure instead of just owning their little piece of the world. So this was honestly an F5 sales engineer on site talking to a very aggressive application owner. And so it was there was UDP stream in there and they said, let's take a look at the UDP. What's UDP? Well, that reset that conversation. But from an application point of view, that's probably a legitimate question and it is not a bad question. There are no more bad questions anymore, even though at the end of the day, there totally are. But as application owners start having to worry about SSL, programmers have to start worrying about what is a subnet. We want to roll our heads a little bit and it's really frustrating, but we're starting those conversations again because the cloud has introduced them. So we're just going to do some who, whys, whats, and hows, and then really focus on Q&A. I'm Chase. I'm on the DevCentral team. I've been on DevCentral for 3 years. Before that, I was actually an architect at F5 on their IT team for 6 years. Before that, I worked as an architect at Visio Software before Microsoft bought them. And yeah, when we were cool. And then I worked for AVT, Applied Voice Technology, that turned into Capteris, but I was always in the support, telecommunications. I used to be a SIP guru. I'm not a SIP guru anymore. But this is for the big IP audience, and the big IP audience is changing. There are new people having to deal with our traditional services, and they don't know how our services work. And how does that impact your architecture? What do we define as a traditional data center anymore? Because to make things easy, we will break stuff or we will make security limitations, design issues. And then do you do stay data center? Do you do cloud? Do you do hybrid cloud? Do you do multi-cloud? What do you want to do? It's up to you, but I want to hear what you're having issues with so we can address that. DevCentral content gets built by questions from the community and questions from the salespeople who are asking on behalf of their customers. And then we put our stink faces on when product management asks us to write a documentation for them these are the new features. Well, our question is, how do those features relate in the real world and would you even need them? So sometimes we give stink face back to product management on behalf of you, which I enjoy doing. So, who owns the infrastructure? It's a question, literally a question to you, and you get a $10, that's garbage, 22 $10 gift cards, $20, last year they did $20 gift cards. 2 $10 gift cards for who can come up with that answer. Hand up, first hand up. See? It's a trick question. It's complicated, but you get the cards anyway, come grab them after. It's complicated because you don't know. Shadow IT's done this. Marketing deploys applications all day long without ever telling IT because they don't want to have to go through the security requirements. At F5, so I work for the digital marketing group. The digital marketing group was the only group, because I did it, that went through the security review and the legal process to onboard Slack as an acceptable product. F5 had 300 individual Slack accounts. I was the only one that had it approved because the approval process was such a pain in the butt. So there were 300 application owners of Slack at F5. We've consolidated, we've made it cool. Everybody thanks me for doing all the dirty legwork, which took 8 months. But that's the complication. There is no one group anymore. So now you have to figure out how to manage a marketing developer. Marketing, so I'm using F5 again. Marketing, we have our own data scientists. They like to say that they're the first data scientists of F5. Well, they're not. We just called them different things in IT. They were just really smart people that did a lot with analytics. So now there's compete across organization for who owns the application. And then when the application gets brought back into some sort of regulatory control, who's responsible for those pain points? It's about re-engaging IT, and it's about IT re-engaging the customer, which are those organizations. Or if you're a service provider, reseller, telling them what I just told you. This is my second speech in a row, so I'm getting a little punchy. So what are we talking about? Big IP devices are no longer the source of record. DevOps has done this. Network admins did not like this, but that's just a way of life. Deal with it. I'll show you a diagram of what my buddy and I came up with the other day. It's cool. But big IP is not the source of record. Suddenly source control is cool again. GitHub is cool. SVN is not cool, but people still use it. Bitbucket is cool. So now there are all these repositories of authoritative control over your configuration, the same way they're your authoritative control over your code. So infrastructure is now the source of record at GitHub. So what I mean with that is, if you're using declarative interfaces, so first question, declarative versus iterative. Does anybody kind of know the gist, or I can say it if you want. If anybody knows, just raise your hand. I got more coffee cards. Coffee cards? So, think of, I did an experiment in elementary school, well, my teacher did, where she wanted everybody to make a sandwich. So she said, write the steps on how to make a sandwich. And then it was funny because nobody said, take the bread out of the bread bag. So now you're spreading peanut butter and jelly on top of the plastic. It was a hoot, but it made us understand the order of operation. That's iterative. So if I need to build a virtual server, there are very specific steps in our API that I have to do, or the whole process will fail. Jason talked about, one of the classes here talked about building an HA pair with a REST interface takes 73 steps. So what if I could make that one step? That's declarative. That's just, I want this state. I want this state of an application. I want this state of a configuration. So that is infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code using GitHub or another source repository outside of Big IP as your authoritative interface. Suddenly I have a declarative statement of this virtual server that lives in GitHub. If somebody needs to make an update, it's made there. CI/CD process pushes that to the device. So that makes service catalogs a lot easier. It makes integrating that into whatever process your automation teams a lot easier, because now the network admin doesn't have to do a ticket. Shadow IT is now regular IT. That's just the way of life. Deal with it. It's not going away. And we either adapt to provide services for those groups or we become obsolete. I say we because I am your traditional system admin, architecture, network admin that gets super frustrated at these application owners that don't know what they're doing, but they're just deploying fast and loose. They're deploying fast, shiny balls across everywhere that the executives start dancing around, they get excited, but at the end of the day, there's now a compliance issue, there's a security issue, and we have to be the bad guys to clean it up. So we're going to get with the program. Shadow IT is now just part of operation. Cloud caters to deregulation of ownership. Applications get deployed in silos. Applications get deployed by a smaller group. Applications are not necessarily part of the enterprise anymore. They should be. They should be part of your catalog. This is that everybody's seen the stats where somebody will ask the CT or the CIO, how many applications do you have? 200. Well, and then they audit and there are 800 because they're all deployed by these shadow IT organizations. This is literally, that happened to F5. There were 800 applications that the enterprise IT group did not know about because individual groups had deployed them. So now you have to go through the multi-year process of reining in 800 independent applications. It gets dangerous because for F5, because we make a product in the cloud, every group gets a cloud account. And every group may delegate, subdivide those cloud accounts. So now there's 1,200 AWS accounts. There's 1,200 individually billed accounts. But before that, nobody knew where the cost was going. Nobody knew where these resources were going. So IT said, at least let us manage the billing. And that got their foot in the door to saying, okay, now I know where all of our resources are. Because now they're willing for us to participate. And now we can actually start saying, hey, could you not do this? Could you not use this 10-based network and spam the Department of Defense with your test application? Happened last week. I kid you not, it was awesome. App owners wanted access. They didn't get it. They moved on. I go to a lot of regional DevOps developer conferences. This is the number one reason people don't use IT services. So, and if any of you were next door for the Cloud 101, I said this in there. There were a lot of developers that didn't know we had an API. There are a lot of developers that would have used us if they knew they had a REST interface to deploy profiles. And it's frustrating because we want to be a part of that conversation, but the network admin is like, ugh, I don't want to do that. Well, with traditional infrastructure, absolutely correct. Don't do that because that's an administrative login to a secured appliance. When you're using REST APIs, though, with that new source of record, that becomes not an issue because now your automation chain that's a little more controlled, hopefully, is now in part of that process. So you can allow people to say, I want this configuration, I want this configuration. App owners are just going to keep moving on unless we provide these services in an easy to ingest method. And I will admit, Hamish, I will admit that I give a lot of colorful feedback to our management team, specifically on licensing, because my problem is like big IP trials. If you can't ingest it, you're not going to use it. So if people can't get a trial of big IP, they're not going to try big IP. For the same reason, application owners, if they can't try to use big IP, the resources that you're providing through some sort of manual ticketing process, they're not going to use it. So the key is making it easy to ingest the services that big IP provides. I will actually show you a really cool architecture about that. And then this goes back to that one. IT is not scripting a ticket. That's not automation. So we use ServiceNow, and we've automated some stuff, but it's still a manual ticket on the back end that somebody's got to go through, go to change control once a week, discuss the change, approve it, then manually apply it. That's not automation. All you did was give me a prettier interface for 2 steps out of 15. Automation is where the network admin creates the policies, tests the policies, and goes to lunch, because the policies now define how people use a service catalog that's been given to them. Same with security templates. The security person knows what's going on and those applications are built well. They can create a bunch of security policies and suddenly you have a la carte security of WAF services. Do I want high? We actually do this in Azure. I can show a demo later down at DevCentral if you want, but Azure, you can deploy big IP traditionally, or you can deploy WAF services when you have a security incident. The security center in Azure will say, hey, you have an exposed web application, it's bad. Deploy something. So we will click it, click, 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 and then we say, what kind of security? High, medium, or low? So we built those high, mediums, or low. That was literally an amalgamation of different ASM policies that we watched people using when they uploaded quick views. It's anonymous, don't worry, but we can see at least what policies are active, and then we can say, those are good policies, let's kind of turn that into a new template. So that's actually what Azure WAF Services is deploying when you deploy that with Big IP. Those are the things that people want. They either want it fully integrated into CI/CD, or they want an a la carte option at their service catalog, and then to walk away and have it ready in 10 minutes. Not change control on Wednesday, deploy on Friday night, blah, sucks. Don't do that. Otherwise, they're going to want it. They won't get it. They'll move on. All right. So this is where we get into the hows, and this is just a couple loose examples of traditional deployment scenarios. So this is showing you a couple things. There's a colo. Does my mouse? There's my mouse. There's a tradition. Oh, it's right. It's mirrored. Awesome. So we have a colo. So I'll say it. F5 uses Equinix. We do private data center. We do colocation in multi-regions across the U.S. and Europe. Not Asia yet. Oh, we do have one in Asia. And then this is almost a loose representation of what I deployed at F5. Goodness. We have different app DMZs to secure the applications, not only from malicious activity, but from malicious devs that get a little loose with their deployment strategies. We have federated secure policies for federation and VPN management into those locations. I was actually surprised to see last year at Agility how many people thought that was the coolest thing they had ever seen. Was I showed them our web portal. I said, we go to vpn.f5.com. It presents me with my two-factor credentials. Right now we're using Gemalto. I have a hard token, I have a soft token on my phone, and then I said, now I have a web top of all my federated applications right here. I can go to most of those applications and it will redirect all the federation, or I have this web top of all the applications. That's actually how I use my cloud accounts. AWS, I have AWS, Azure, and Google. I just access them through my web top. And it just pops open and I'm off to the races. And then it also, because I'm privileged, I can click full VPN tunnel if I want. Not everybody gets that at F5. And it gives me the flexibility that I need to do everything. And it's quick and I can do it anywhere. We have a couple applications that require full VPN tunnels, and I'm saying kill those applications. If they can't provide federated services through a web top or through a SaaS into federation, don't deploy them. Get rid of them. I won't say the name because it is a popular current modern application. They didn't do a good job of deploying their stuff. But in these situations, I want to point out a couple things. This one right here, this is on premise. This is my data center. This is your data center. These users, see that guy? That one little right there? That's a bad user. That's in your network that has access to your data center. And this is something even F5 did wrong for a long time, and it took us a while to mitigate that, was the big IP was not considered a perimeter. We did a marketing campaign, the new perimeter. Does anybody remember that? New perimeter? The new perimeter is your data is your sacred entity. Your users are a problem. Your users are malicious accidentally. So protect your data from your users when they're on your network. So here, we're using DNS, AFM, and LTM to segregate the data center networks from the users. You think that's normal. Surprisingly, it's not. We get calls all the time where databases, applications are down because they weren't segregated out. If you provide only one interface and you control that interface security through Big IP, you're not going to have an issue. The problem was, in this specific case, a global service person wrote a fantastic application so they could do scheduling of the support tickets and all that. The problem was they didn't know how to do SQL queries, so they kept doing select star, select star, select star. It's like, you can't do that with 1 million records spread across something like that. But it killed the database. And everybody's looking like, why? How could this have been prevented? Well, how is this database being accessed without Big IP in the middle to manage and monitor this? Because we actually could have seen the select star and mitigated. In this case, they deployed Big IP as an aggregator of applications, but they didn't deploy it as a security appliance. So everybody still had fingers around big IP into the data center IP range. Surprisingly a huge amount of customers of our product and others, that's common. And as you get more of these distributed IT groups, they're deploying applications in weird spots that aren't the data center, it's the building. And that building, those users should be considered DMZ'd. Those are malicious users that have access to some crazy applications. So this goes back again to enterprise IT, work with this group, give them access to maybe their own private network in your data center, or provide those big IP services somewhere else. I don't have that slide, do I? Better. If not, I'll bring it up. So that's where stuff like per app VE, a small licensed big IP, could be deployed to that network for those people and encapsulate those applications. It's much cheaper because it supports one virtual server or one IP with 3 virtual servers. So it gives you flexibility, and it's that service instance of what they're trying to do. So we have the tools to do it. It's just enterprise IT is always in that catch-up game. They're never catching up. An application or these users are just your malicious entity. And that still is an ongoing problem. We still get that email through support, through DevCentral of these applications are down. Well, how do you know? Well, because I'm accessing it directly without going from this user network. I'm like, well, let's first talk about that. Could there be other people doing that? A lot of the times they are. Like, big IP doesn't let me do something, so I'm going to go around it. My own development team did that with my Exchange infrastructure. Because they had to test into Exchange, they had a authorized portal into corporate Exchange. Well, a developer made a beautiful program that accessed EWS services for calendar. They didn't know how to properly throttle requests through that. I would have created a traffic throttling policy if they asked. So suddenly we couldn't figure out why the calendar stopped working. They were doing the calendar lookup equivalent to select star. So are these consultants available for these dates? Well, they were querying everybody's calendar for the entire year. If you've opened Outlook and opened up a shared calendar, you know that's a horrible idea. So even in this case, so what did I do? Because Big IP was allowing them to do that, I just clicked one button and it stopped. And they were never allowed to do that again. In fact, there's another example of when Apple released, I think it was iOS 7 something or 6 something, they had the calendaring issue. Suddenly transaction logs were hitting terabytes like instantly. It was a calendaring bug. Somebody else in the public world, so the news hit like at 8 a.m. By 9 a.m., well, the third Google result was somebody coming up with an I rule to mitigate the issue. And they just made it public and they said, hey, if you have a big IP, this is not a problem. It was awesome. It was the best publicity because we didn't come up with it. It was a customer who came up with it, published it to DevCentral. We said, that's fascinating. I love it. And they were dropping connections. So we took it one step further and we said, let's just add a logging entry and put it into Splunk so we can get refreshes of whose iPhone is causing that issue. So not only are we mitigating access or mitigating the issue, but we now know whose iPhone needs to be fixed. And because we had that protective layer, they didn't drop our Exchange infrastructure. Everybody else's Exchange infrastructure was tanking. It was awesome. Loved my day. Loved that day. But there's other stuff here. Segregating applications from each other is just something that we need to do. Big IP provides you the ability to be part of that segregation. If it's colo, it's technically private data center, so you still have layer 2. You have you have VLAN tagging, so you can create those segregations. When you get into the cloud, it's going to get a little bit more interesting. The cloud. So from my previous conversation was you have the build your own pizza model, whereas you have on-premise, you have infrastructure as a service, you have platform as a service, and then you have software as a service. And now then there's X as a service, vendor as a service, like F5 as a service, Bob's Burgers as a service. Everybody wants their own AAS. But really the cloud deployments, the majority that we see, the majority that I see with my buddies, also the advantage of working in Seattle is a lot of my soccer buddies work at AWS. So you get to find out the underlying details of what's going on there and at Microsoft. Where was I going with that? So the majority of that everything is seeing is infrastructure as a service. People are looking at VMware and saying, how do I cloudy that? And they're literally taking image and dropping. That's not always the best idea. It's time to re-examine your architecture when you move to the cloud. Dietrich Dorner had a statement that I actually had a slide for in my previous was, when you're facing, that doesn't matter, I forget it. But it's basically, when you're under pressure, you tend to fall back on known methodologies. And so the cloud is the biggest place to not do that. Do not bring your old problems into new environments. So when you think cloud, how can I redeploy my application to make it more available, more secure, and a little bit easier to use? I don't have to worry about hardware. I just have to worry about compute. You change what you worry about. You have to worry about, did I give it enough vCPUs? Did I give it enough memory? Did I give it enough interfaces? Because now you have to worry about what instance are you selecting and how many interfaces will that support, and how many IP addresses will that interface support or that instance support, because they will max you out. If you're deploying in a traditional monolithic sense where you use big IP as a perimeter, you may run out of IP addresses for that instance, and you just can't add another interface. That is the instance limit. There are public non-AWS websites, non-Azure websites that will tell you those limits because they're finding all this out and building websites for it, but that is not apparent when you deploy in the cloud. So these are those things that have been catching people a lot. Instance deployment is a problem that is not a problem if you plan. When you look at our cloud deployments, our templates will give you a recommendation of the instance that you should be using. The screens that you don't see are the max interfaces, the throughput. Most of the time, instances in AWS are limited by throughput, not by CPU. So you can have CPU sitting idle all day long because you're maxing out this theoretical limit because of how SDNs are deployed in cloud. You won't know that if you just said, oh, that's cool, that's enough CPU, that's enough memory. These are these weird things that it took a lot of investigation to realize, like, wait a minute, we're faster than what they're providing us on a virtual box. So that's actually some of the limitations where we say, well, maybe you do active-active and deploy it across, not because of big IP, but because that's the instance's limit, unless you want to double the size of your instance and bump up your monthly reoccurring OpEx. So these are problems we're running into, our customers are running into, and even with our recommendations on templates are always changing, and so we're always having to change to meet the cloud providers' templates. You may look at a 2 CPU, 16 gigabytes of RAM, but there's another one that's 2 CPUs, 16 gigabytes of RAM for $80 a month more. Why? That's a different CPU. And unless you dive into these weird esoteric matrices, you didn't realize you just deployed on an old like Skybridge, Sandy Bridge, whatever, Skylake compared to maybe a Xeon that you did need. So you have to dive into these things. And so we try to take that guesswork out, but a lot of people are still going to run into that. And so those are those problems that we see on a day in and day out. Here's an example of where we own security. Cloud doesn't care what you do. Last year, there's tens of thousands, not joking, of Hadoop instances exposed on the internet. Default username and password, no firewall, no ACLs, exposed. All that data is gone, election data gone, everybody's data, it's just exposed because they thought the cloud provided the security. The cloud doesn't provide the security. They provide the tools so you can build the security, and that's where we suddenly become functional, is because they're not providing you firewalls. They're providing, like AWS, Azure, Google, they're providing security groups, which you have to build, but that's interdependent. That's talking about how does this talk to that, but they're pretty open. When you suddenly say, I now need this to be publicly available, ooh, they don't really cover that well besides saying, yep, okay, it's publicly available. Well, what did I just make publicly available? 443, 8443, 22, 21, 25. But now what? There's nothing in front of those. They're wide open to whatever you just gave it access to. So suddenly, WAF and LTM have stories again in your public cloud, because you're now going to be deploying a lot of independent services to meet all these requirements that you've been doing in your data centers. Deploy big IP. Deploy what you've been protecting them with in your traditional data center. Deploy that one device, that one service layer, and protect all those applications. This goes back to who owns the application. Application owners, developers don't know they need this until they've been exposed, until they've been compromised, until your data. When I talk to somebody whose system I use, I say, can you please secure my data? I'm really tired of having my game accounts hacked and somebody trying to use my Steam, whatever. Happens all the time to me because I use a lot of services. I say, could you please secure your stuff? I don't say stuff. Secure your stuff better, because I'm really tired of this, because this was preventable. But because you had a bunch of pure developers who have no idea how to run a network, they just deployed stuff. Sony's PlayStation Network had no firewalls in front of their web servers. Remember that was like 5 years ago, 4 years ago? Holy moly, Sony, because it was the PlayStation Network, was a different group. It was a distributed application by a distributed team of developers, not system admins. So we see that on a day in and day out. DevCentral hears this, support hears this day in and day out. This all needs security. So in this instance, I'm doing two things. I have big IPs in front of my apps in each zone, because zones are in, so this is AWS, so each zone is a subnet. Good. Azure does availability sets. It's different. You build one subnet and it will just build it, it will apply it. Then you build an availability set and you say, I want this type of reliability, and it just deploys that against the one subnet. If you want to talk about that stuff, meet me down in the DevCentral booth. It drives me crazy because everybody names the stuff the same thing, but they work differently. Google also deploys something similar to AWS, but they just build out a subnet for every single region that they have automatically for your one virtual network. And they just say, do whatever you want to do, which is fine, but that really overwhelms a lot of application owners, and they accidentally deploy across some crazy data centers. Like, why is your application deployed in Jakarta? All of your users are in Amsterdam. I don't know. Maybe you should talk to a network admin about that. So in this instance, this is actually a common deployment that I do, whereas I'm using Big IP DNS, I'm using Big IQ over here to automate and do auto scaling of a per app VE. So I have given a template to an application owner, and I said, if you need web services, you have 2 per app VEs that you can deploy on, and you can auto scale up depending on what you need to maybe 5, because I don't want to give them 10 because they're going to just use it and I don't want to use the license. But I'm giving them the option to create their own elastic application with LTM. And so the caveat is the Big IP Cloud Edition works with the per app VE, and that includes LTM and advanced WAF. So advanced WAF includes bot detection, all that cool stuff. So when they hear about that, they're like, oh my gosh, one service is deploying all of that? Yeah, and I still get to own it, and you use it, you ingest it as a service catalog. You've logged in, or they automated Big IQ with REST interfaces, role-based access control REST interfaces, so they can't nuke pave all of their stuff. And they have now deployed through their CI/CD into Big IQ, which deployed an application of profiles that I built and my security person built. And it took them, if it was manual, it took them 5 minutes. And Big IP was up taking traffic in 5 minutes. So these are the things that we are starting to be able to do in the cloud, which we couldn't do a few years ago. It's interesting. It's cool. I'm enjoying my job right now because we're coming up with creative ways to solve problems. Somebody asked me in the last discussion, what is your recommendation for X? And I said, I have no recommendations because we have more products to do whatever you want to do. I can say if you don't do something, it's exposed. But if you want to use Big IP for this, go for it. If you want to use per app VE for this, go for it. The more stuff that we can offer you provides you flexibility to your customers or to your users, to your app teams, to the shadow people deploying, because WAF is supposed to be complicated. So here's Big IP Cloud Edition. I'm bringing this up specifically because there's a lot of questions on it, and I was the lucky short straw that wrote about it on DevCentral. It's confusing because marketing got a hold of it. That's my fault. It's not my fault. It's kind of my fault. Big IP Cloud Edition, if you don't know, it's a combination of two products. It's Big IQ 6.0 and whatever is newer, Big IQ 6 as a minimum, and Big IP, the virtual edition, version 13.07 and up. Now, what? So Big IP is just Big IP. It's the virtual edition. It's the one you can download and put into VMware. Where it becomes the per app VE, it's a license. It's licensed throughput restriction, but because of that, and because it's per app, it's way cheaper than deploying a whole Big IP. So sometimes people freak out. I said, oh yeah, you can deploy Big IP per app. No, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. That costs a ton of money. Well, what if I told you it's only this cost? Because it's only designed to do one IP and 3 virtual servers. So we like to say it's called per app, but think of it as per service. If you have a service you're trying to deploy, it'll deploy in line. And Big IQ is what's going to automate that. Big IQ is what's going to create the auto scaling policies of start with 2, go up to 5 for this application or this set of applications. And now I can provide a role-based dashboard to my application owner. So she's now got a Big IP service catalog. Literally, what's the name in DNS? What's its IP? What are your web servers? If you want, you can let them select what SSL profile, if they had a bunch of certs they like to use. And if the security is required, what WAF policy has been recommended for this application? And then they click deploy. And from that configuration to Big IP taking traffic takes 6 minutes. The benefit of that is the per app VE only happens because if anybody's paid attention, I wrote an article on it because I pay attention because this is what I do. Big IP from version 12 to now, if you noticed, has cut its footprint in half for the virtual edition. So it went from 160, 120 gigabytes. It's now about 80 gigabytes. And we've also removed the second slot for in-place upgrades. So in this instance, it would be a tear down, replace with a new version because it's really elastic. So with elastic, you're deploying a new one. You're deploying a new one. Well, now you're deploying a newer version. You're deploying a newer version. Instead of download the image, put the image on the second partition, upgrade, reboot, blah, 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 blah. Now, don't worry about it. If your deployment time is 6 minutes, you don't have time to do upgrades. So per app VE now reduces that. So, and its boot up time has been reduced from 15 minutes to 6 minutes. We just got rid of stuff that didn't need to be there. So it's now a cloud-ready virtual edition. Whether you use the per app VE license or not, that's available to you in the cloud. That's the new norm. That's version 13 up in all 3 major public clouds. Or you download the virtual edition and make your own custom templates for OpenShift or VMware or whatever you want to do. It's cool. The second thing to note on this, we don't not like cloud providers' native competition to us. So in AWS, we're going to auto scale all of these per app VEs out for your application. We are actually using elastic load balancing from Amazon as a layer 4 traffic distributor to distribute traffic to those because we're not trying to be just a load balancer. We're a traffic management. We're LTM and advanced WAF. So we'll let that elastic IP come in, hit native ELB, and ELB is just going to basically say, go to one of these 4 guys based off our very basic load balancing requirements. Once we get the traffic, now we can do our traffic manipulation, what we've been doing for 18 years. Add an I rule, don't care. Traffic policies, TCP policies, HTTP policies, all this stuff that ELB doesn't really do as well as we do. So we use them for L4. In VMware, we actually have a special low-cost license to specifically deploy a couple big IPs as L4 traffic managers only. And then we'll do the same when we go to Azure. We'll be using their native load balancing services as L4 traffic distribution only. There's no logic in there besides basic load balancing algorithms. And then it gives it to us, and we're going to handle the rest. The alternative to that goes back to here, or you use Big IP DNS, and Big IP DNS plugs into Big IP better than anything else and can actually watch that traffic real time and say, I can make much better load balancing decisions. But now because we've added Big IP DNS, there's some DDoS protection in there too. And we can deploy across multiple clouds. We can deploy in the cloud and your private data center and your colo, because Big IP DNS does not care what cloud you're in. It just cares about, am I talking to Big IP? So this is where the marketing multi-cloud, the hybrid cloud suddenly starts to make sense, because you may have a PowerShell guru that wants to use Azure for Exchange. You may have a marketing department, sales department that wants to build a couple templates for consulting in AWS. All the applications need security. I don't care where they are. Why not go with a common deployment scenario instead of, well, you need to learn WAF over here, you need to learn WAF over here. Well, how do they do traffic management ADC services over here? How do they do it over there? One config, one declarative, remember that declarative interface, one config, one state of what you want, and that's going to get deployed either through CI/CD or that's a policy in BigIQ. BigIQ doesn't care. So these are the things that we're trying to tell people. This is a better way to do stuff. Stop logging into a GUI per Big IP and updating a policy, or stop using a REST interface to one Big IP, using this iterative model and having to remove and then replace and then update in order to get your configuration. That's still common practice, and we want people to start thinking a different way so they still have a job when everybody's automation solution is in there. Become the policy owners and not the traffic inhibitors. And so this, I had mentioned briefly the little scenario that my buddy and I built. It was in retaliation to our IT team's automation of, I used air quotes for the recording, automation of ServiceNow. They automated about 3 steps of the ingestion process and gave me a pretty interface, but all it did was create a ticket. Somebody had to review the ticket. Somebody had to escalate the ticket because it never went into the right queue. It went to the triage team. And the triage team will triage it incorrectly, and then it will have to get redistributed. So their automation still took a week to get the change I needed. So a former APM and firewall admin, a network admin, Robert Teller, now works for product development. We came up with this. So we said, what if you could provide automation and a really pretty service catalog? So you're still going to use ServiceNow, but I'm a developer and I need a web app. So we built this and it worked fantastic. We overcomplicated it. I reduced some of the complexities here. So you as a user, a very smart, intuitive user who does not want to wait for anything, will log into ServiceNow and they will ask for a new web stack. And I'm saying web stack. So this is going to deploy DNS. This is going to deploy Big IP. This is going to deploy Ubuntu and Nginx as a web server on Ubuntu. It's going to deploy a whole stack and then deliver them a DNS name and an IP address. So what we did was we decided to use GitHub as our source of authority. So we have all of these policies pre-built based off what you're selecting in ServiceNow. So SSL profile. We use Let's Encrypt for this internal demo that we had built, so it was all kind of automated. It gets a little more complicated when you have static certificates, but it's still doable. You just need to be really on your game for cert management. I manage certs at F5, so I was on my game. So GitHub, you're welcome. So GitHub and AWS were integrated, so I had my GitHub bucket functionality automated. What would happen is the GitHub declarative statement was then turned in, Lambda took it and turned it into an S3 file because we didn't know if we wanted to use AWS. But it literally created a physical file in S3. Then we had a Redis database that went in and scavenged those so we can actually see them go in and out. It would take that configuration change, update, so think REST API, gets, patches, puts, deletes. It would take that and put it into this database because we needed an in-order operation. We needed to monitor. We wanted to make sure there was some error correcting. And then we had Jenkins over here monitor that database for changes. Jenkins went in and said, oh, I have 20 new things to do. That's cool. In what order do I need to do these things? Because if you have competing web teams building who gets theirs first, it then took that, turned it into an Ansible playbook, and deployed a virtual IP to big IP. It then updated and added the pools that were being built. This was where the database and Jenkins came in helpful because we needed the web servers up. We wanted the web servers up so we could build the pool nodes and get good health checks because we were not going to deliver an application that had no health monitors or bad health monitors. So there was error correction. But it deployed a full big IP configuration and it built web servers and it built DNS, which we actually used IPAM through somebody else and IPAM, so it pulled IP addresses. It did the entire process, 5 minutes. 5 minutes from request to an available web stack that they had SSH access to for Nginx on the back end, but we didn't do WAF because it was internal, can we do this project? But it was a full LTM policy or LTM virtual server with an SSL policy, with an HTTP policy that the person could either define or he could grade out. If they don't know what they're doing, we're not going to ask them what policy they want because they don't know. So we're going to predefine it for some people, not for others. Big IP Cloud Edition can now do that also. But this is where everybody's going. This is where you can interject big IP, excuse me, into these automation processes and not be a roadblock. So once we had that in there, we said, hey, anybody want to use this config? I think 4 teams modified it for their own use, and now they have their own service catalogs, and they run their own big IPs, and they've now automated it. The amount of change that they are doing is crazy in their OpenShift environments. So PD is doing this internally with OpenShift, but it's all automated. And you go in, you choose what you want to deploy. It will deploy everything within 5 to 10 minutes. Big IQ took a little bit longer, but it just deploys it. So now I have oh, I need to test this, boom, done. And it was based off that. And it's in service now, so it's auditable. So compliance is even super happy about it. And that's really where most of our heartache comes from, right? Because it's who has access to what? Oh, shut up. That's it. But these are the things that we're doing with Big IP. These are the things that we want people to do because Big IP sooner or later needs to get into the mix. When I hear developers saying, well, I didn't even know you could do that, it's frustrating. It's frustrating because I know there's a network admin that's also frustrated, and they shouldn't be frustrated because this is all doable. And so over the next year, you're going to see a lot of this content. We're going to publish a lot of this content in the form of how-tos, clouddocs.f5.com. I did not write that down, but I'm telling you now, clouddocs.f5.com is a fantastic resource for understanding how we're kind of suggesting to deploy these things. They will say, do you want to deploy high availability in AWS? Use this template, and that will get you started. We don't want you to only use that template. Take that template and put it into your automation. Nobody should be deploying from our GitHub. They should be deploying from their GitHub. Your template just should probably live in GitHub. And it's been awesome. And so to see the change that even our PD groups and some of our more aggressive customers hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Big IP Cloud Edition was built in response to customer request. They wanted automation, they wanted auto scaling, and they wanted a very small, low cost per app virtual edition. All was built for customer requests. And we said, this is where marketing got a hold of it and said, this is fantastic. Let's brand this as a new product. I'm well, it's a solution. It's 2 products, but it's available to anybody. It's just a couple of those aggressive customers came up with it. And so we have no problem doing that. So now I want to open it up for, what's our time right now? I forgot to start the timer, so I don't know. Okay, so we got 10 minutes for Q&A. Who uses Azure? Anybody? Nobody uses that. Come on, PowerShell, people. Well, there you go. How about AWS? There you go. I expect more AWSs. How about Google Cloud? Google Cloud. I just got my new Google Cloud account. It's interesting to see how people deploy into those scenarios because of how those cloud environments were built. People come into infrastructure from different points. Google started with their services. Amazon started with replacing Big Iron. And then Azure started with SaaS, really. So Exchange Online, 365 Online, then came PowerShell, then came all these solutions. AWS was, we just want virtual systems without having to deal with VMware Director. And then Google was like, well, do you want what we built? And then they came in with the infrastructure as a service a little bit later in that. So it's funny to see how people come in, but in the end, it's all infrastructure as a service at this point, and they don't own your security, nor do they care to own your security. That's why we're still going to be in business, because people are still running into these security issues. Questions? Give me some questions. I got 2 more of these cards. If anybody has questions, also, if you have questions and you want a long discussion about it, come down to the DevCentral booth. We love talking architecture because we'll sometimes take what you've done and we'll write an article about it. If it's cool, we'll write an article about it. Question?
So I know it's not sexy right now, but that last slide that you showed, basically we could do that, but the web server would be private cloud VM, within our data.
Totally doable.
Yeah, I don't think it changes that much, but it's still.
Yeah, this is just showing you, this is really trying to illustrate that Big IP is just another service in your supply chain of applications. It's not this stop check. It's not this ITIL process halt. It's not, we need to bring and engage all these other teams to discuss your application now and is it okay? It shouldn't. It just should be just part of your streamlined process and it should be automated, whether it's a couple button clicks or it's fully automated through whatever CI process you have. We don't care what you use. If you're using something we haven't figured out, we'll go build it. Jason Rom on the DevCentral team is the one who's writing the Python SDK, the Terraforms, the Ansibles. We have a lot. I haven't talked about containers, but we got a lot about containers. We have container proxy. We have container integration. We will work with Kubernetes like proxy. If you have the routing module, we can go into the nodes and manage the nodes directly. It depends, and we're coming out with more. It's just, I don't know.
Just trying to figure out how much would we cut out. We still have this very manual process for server build and involves system integrators. But assuming that, we're just in charge of essentially the virtual server, but we desperately need to automate that.
Yeah. And so that's actually going to be interesting because you want to get those other groups in the game. Because it doesn't help to automate the virtual server deployment if somebody's then got to manually go build everything behind it. It's still going to take hours instead of minutes. It should take minutes, people. I want minutes from my deployments. Yeah, we had the same problem. For a while, I can automate Big IP all day long, but until I can automate the VMware stack behind it, or I get the team that's willing to do it, it doesn't help me to automate part of the process. Because the rest of it, again, is that manual ticket. Any other question? Question in the back?
So, using the term Big IP interchange.
Yes.
Kind of deviate one, like 2 ways.
So, no, Big IP, so we have a DevCentral Basics article to help clarify that. Big IP is the solution of traffic management offerings, both hardware and software, virtual edition, designed around traffic management and security management. Big IQ is centralized management of Big IP. Everything from, you can run again, marketing. And I'm in marketing, so I'm allowed to do that. Big IQ.
The reason why I have
You probably are. Well, it depends on the version. If you upgrade to BigIQ 6, your current process is probably underutilizing it. 6 was a big turning point. I had a lot of gotchas and caveats around the previous editions. Like, well, that's neat, we're almost there, but that's not the management I want. The new one really is providing a service desk from the BigIP admin to the application owner, and providing the same security benefits to the security manager. Security manager, build your policy and walk away. Don't worry about deploying it per app, per IP, per instance. Just build your policy, who's allowed to use it, for what type of application, go have coffee. So yeah, there are a lot of, and then also BigIQ can be used for free as a license manager only. Don't worry about that, I don't want to get into that. Some people don't, some people's automation process, they're using another pane of glass somewhere else for management. So they just want the licensing to be automated, because licensing is generally where you run into weird roadblocks with BigIP. So they'll run BigIQ as license manager only in the cloud for free. They'll get their license pool, or they'll kind of consolidate some of their other existing license if they're not doing utility licensing. And then as I spin up BigIPs, either the traditional monolithic perimeter style or per app VEs, it's just pulling out of the appropriate pools and technically giving back when that IP is, or that license is no longer needed. So people will use that when they're using other panes of glass for monitoring, traffic monitoring. If they got a big Splunk deployment, they may not want to use BigIQ. BigIQ 6 does offer a lot of great new analytics, and we can use our own log collectors, our data collection devices, or we can offload it to third party. But BigIQ, just for the application dashboards alone and just being able to provide a service catalog of BigIP services is reason enough. It's awesome. I hated the theory when they were giving me all the marketing stuff, and then when I spun up my own instance in our private cloud just to play with it, I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, I can do this. Oh, that's cool. And I ended up, I hadn't said that in a long time about BigIQ. So I mean, I can click on the traffic, I can see what's going on. I can see security issues, incidents happen in real time. I can go and see what they're doing. Oh look, there's a volumetric DDoS attack while somebody is trying to do something crazy with this login. I can see all that real time. It was really cool. The application owner can also see it real time. That was a big deal. The application owner now seeing, oh, this is how my traffic is impacted when I made that update. That's cool. That's something we haven't been able to do before. Question?
Just a comment, there's a BigIQ 101 course in this room in 10 minutes.
Yes, stay if you want. Who's doing that one? Kyle Oliver, Randy Dockery? Question behind you though. You should be able to do a config sync group in an active, kind of an active-active. You're not going to fail over traffic. You're just going to fail over. That works better. That works well when you use global server load balancing, where you can actually pay attention and not manually fail over. There are also, and depending on the connectivity, you may or may not be able to do it. You can use those VPC connectors that Azure and AWS and Google have and actually bridge them. AWS is actually bridges over public interfaces, so you're connecting two virtual VPCs together. And technically at that point, you could do a config sync only failover state. That would work. I've seen that done. I've also seen people do it completely manually, where they have automated scripting, take config A to config B. It works, but if you look into the VPC connectivity functionality from the different cloud providers, that would allow you to communicate cross VPC. So theoretically for BigIP, cross subnet. So at that point, your device group should be able to do a config sync, even if it can't do connection mirroring or connection failovers, at least the config is syncing.
Is there a way for big IQ to help with that kind of?
It'll manage the sync group, but the connectivity has to be there first. So if I can build the sync group and I can get the config sync active, I can do it through BigIQ, but I got to get the connectivity working before I can ask BigIQ to do it. So BigIQ is going to assume there's that level of management interface to management interface connectivity happening. BigIQ is not going to handle the watchdog timers and automate the failover process itself. That's up to the DSC between the devices. BigIQ will just help build the group. Yeah. Question over there? Anywhere? Who's looking down?
So I have an ideal candidate, I believe, for moving to cloud edition, which would be nice, because right now he has his own partition on the F file. It is basically completely full.
Yeah.
It's Chronos, it's a town application.
Mhm.
It's never actually played well on that software side. The F5 said it was pretty simple. Chronos itself seems to be just confused by the fact that there's something in Chronos. It's only used like Wednesday and Friday every 2 weeks.
Sure.
So most of the time it just sits there taking up space, and then every now and then they have to update their back end, and they don't know. Every time they update, they have to relearn the F5, basically. Which means I pretty much end up doing it.
So BigIQ is now we're good. BigIQ is now your option then, because it's something they don't have to learn every time.
Yeah, and I imagine I will just put them onto a VMware cloud edition.
Totally works. It's great.
Absolutely no idea what the price point is.
I have no idea the price point either, and that's the problem with my job is I get all my licenses for free, and they all time bomb after a certain amount of time. But yeah, and that would just be a BigIQ, because you can, BigIQ, the whole Cloud Edition is really about the auto scaling. BigIQ alone can manage whatever you want. You don't have to deploy per app VE in an auto scale. I can just buy a bunch of big IP cloud per app VE licenses, never use Cloud Edition, or never use IQ to manage it. So it's up to you, but you want the management functionality, the dashboard control, that service catalog that BigIQ 6 is going to offer, so they don't have to learn the big IP. I don't want anybody to have to remember big IP if they're not the big IP admin, because good gracious, they'll kill themselves, right? When you get down into the nitty gritty of TCP profiles, no application owner should have to know any of those settings. So if you could build the policy for it, and then just say, this is your Chronos policy, use it, then they're good. It's a perfect scenario. That's what it was made for. And it's only getting better. So if there are no, again, so we'll be down at the DevCentral booth. DevCentral is there the entire time. Ask us all the questions you want. Give us ideas for content. Give us a challenge, propose a problem, propose a solution, and we will wing it, or we will come up with a great idea, or we know exactly the person you need to talk to. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy your next session.